everyone, and welcome to the DripDropz After Town Hall for February 8th. My name is Lloyd with the DripDropz team. Got Doug here as well from the DripDropz team. Also, a couple of other guests here. Got Steve and Kenrick. Thank you guys for joining us. Today's After Town Hall topic is feedback frequencies. So we're talking about what it really means when a customer says something to you. What is that? What is it that they're giving you? And more importantly, what you're asking drives what it is that the customer gives to you. So we're gonna dive right in today. So I like this one here. I think tuning into what your customer is really saying about your business is probably one of the most important aspects of this topic. It's actually very easy for us to look for the information that we want to hear and then act upon that information as though it's valid, good information. And then we end up maybe making some pretty bad decisions long term because we've gone in and we've listened to this great feedback that we got and thought we had something really great happening. And then when we get it out in front of a customer base, we end up it falling flat on our face. We've talked in the After Town Halls a couple times about like the Segway thing where they spent all this time in secret and they were building this thing that they just knew everybody was going to love, and it fell flat. It really didn't take off. It didn't do what it was supposed to do. But if you do read any books on entrepreneurship, probably the first thing they say is go and talk to everybody you can. Talk to your friends, talk to your families, talk to your neighbors, talk to everybody, find out what they're thinking, and so you can find that product that you can build that'll make everybody's life better. But if you aren't asking the right questions, then you may find out that you're not getting the information that you really need. So just ask around the room, has anybody had this experience? Has anybody gone into business, asked some questions, thought they had a good feedback, a good, product idea, but then it didn't pan out? Anybody had that experience here?
Yeah, totally. I could definitely respond to that. It's always a funnel. It's almost like the first point of interaction that you have with the business, or if you're trying to solve a problem. At that point, initially, bias is created, so you already start to see things a certain way, and then it becomes hard because now you're one foot in, and your perspective, it all goes back to trying to like take a step back and look at the big picture from 30,000 feet above. But then the more that you become privy to stuff, that it's hard, and you get into the weeds. You know what I mean? Definitely get into the weeds really quickly, lose scope.
Well, and so, in my own experience, it was a few years back, there was a pretty big push going on for mobile application development. Yep. And we had spoken to a pretty big group of local small businesses, and they were all like, "Oh, it's great. That sounds like awesome. I would love to put that in for my business. I would love to do it." And then but unfortunately, the way that questions were asked around pricing and things of that nature, we got some really optimistic figures and some really optimistic adoption levels. And well, it turned out that the customers were really willing to spend about maybe $5 or $10 or $15 a month was about the only price point we could hit, and really not any different than a real budget level website, even with the added features, even with the added benefits.
Yep.
It just they still only saw it really as a website for them, and they really weren't willing to spend more than that $5 or $10 extra, and they certainly weren't willing to spend hundreds of dollars for the design and development of those mobile friendly websites. So it didn't go as well as planned, for sure. So lesson learned.
Yep. It's crazy. I had similar situation, but in a different way, from a different perspective. I was working for a large company, and a really large news organization. And it's so funny because we were trying to reconstruct the whole mobile and the desktop web app experience. Now obviously, like, the company has millions of customers and followers and stuff like that. It has eyes on it. But what was unfortunate is that, we're going through this redevelopment, and we can't even get in front of, we can't actually speak to our audience. We can't speak to enough of them. And that was because of the legal stone wall that we had in front of us. So for testing and getting that validation, that feedback, let's just say we had about, I don't even know, it was under 50. It was under 50 people, and probably, half of that, it was probably even less than that number, that we were able to get some actual feedback from. And what sucked is that, there were so many verticals within there. So it's like there's a lot more people we had to speak to. And we just couldn't get in front of them because we couldn't talk to them. It was just legal. We're like, how do other people do this? So it's like, it was like, are we getting, are we getting everybody's opinion? Are we getting all the feedback? And right there, even from, qualitative standpoint and a quantitative, like, there's another bias there. At what point, because it sucks. It's like you could go on, like, the App Store, for instance, and you can see what people are saying about your stuff, but we can't talk to these people because we can't have an email exchange with them. So, we had no way to talk to the actual customer. So it was kind of weird.
What a tough, place to be stuck in, where there's, but it's funny because there's some analog there with crypto, right? There's certain things that, if we could do these things, but they don't fit into the regulatory environment that we have right now, right? So, like, yeah, we could do that, but we'd get in a lot of trouble for it, even if it would be really successful. So it's like, kind of it's funny, is that same kind of idea, just trying to fit in where you fit in without bumping up against whatever legalities
Exactly.
that you've got to deal with. So that's interesting that it also hits in feedback.
It's crazy. It's crazy because if and there's a lot of studies on that. If people can, I don't want to touch into what could be other topics in this, but to respond anonymously to things, versus to respond, if you're face to face with somebody, you get a whole nother response. So it's like, if people are sitting here, and that is a big problem with crypto right now, it's like trying to preserve the anonymity, and part of that mission of the blockchain, but it's also like, well, who are we talking to here?
Right.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Steve?
Yeah, I've had two businesses. Like, my mother and I had a restaurant in 1981, and then I had a tech business in Germany in the late 90s. And I think that, like, what was hard with the business in 81 was we were doing healthy food, right? And it was all fresh. And, it was downtown Mobile, Alabama, right? All there was junk food. And we were even located in one of the first, that I was aware of, really fancy YMCA fitness centers. I mean, this was a big facility, and it had a wonderful kitchen, right? It was easy to do, in terms of, like, putting out the food. And I mean, it was great, and people loved it. But, I was trying to, I was really young at the time, and I was trying to just, I just wanted to make $500 or $600 a week. I wasn't trying to get rich. And Jesus, man, like, people would cheat. I was doing a fresh salad bar, and it was really nice, and you'd get it if you paid for the all you can eat. You'd even get, like, fresh made muffins, that were, like, made that morning. Man, when I went from $2.25 to $2.75 or something like that, you would have thought that I was trying to, take their daughter. It was just, I couldn't believe the complaints I got about that shit. And I was just trying to, I just wanted a little bit more of a pad, on my profit margin. But the tech business in the late 90s was, I understood what it could be good for, right? This was when color laser copiers first came out. Because they were laser, they were digital. And so you could hook them directly up to a Mac, to a raster image processor, right? And you could just print out straight out. And the solo graphic designers, you know, the solo guys that were dealing with clients, you know, doing their, you know, whatever, their brochures or their pitches and proposals, those guys got it. And my absolute best customer was a woman who had like 3 or 4 art classes. And I just kind of met her casually somewhere and told her what I was doing. She was like, how big can you scan images? And I was like, well, I could go up to 11 by 14, you know? And she was like, well, that's what my students, you know, that's what we draw on that size. You could just scan those in directly. I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, I think they'd love that, you know, because she would do like, you know, at Christmas time, these little kids, I mean, these are like 4 and 5-year-old kids. And she was just saying, make your version of Santa Claus, right? And they did the same thing at Valentine's. And I mean, these kids were the bomb, man. These were the best images of Santa Clauses I ever saw. I mean, they just go psychedelic. And so what I would do is I would print up postcards. You know, I would scan their images in, and then they would buy postcards. And I charged them so much a postcard. And I made a killing on that shit. And they ate it up. They ate it up. But I could, you know, like they couldn't do that all the time. You know, it's like, how often can you have a picture made of your kid, right? You know, like you can't scan every, you know, you can't pay for all that stuff. But it was so hard to really convey the impact to small businesses, right? You know, like I felt like that was, you know, full color printing. You know, you come to me, I'm just a guide. I can scan this in for you, and I can pack it into the printing price, and you've got a real marketing campaign that's quick and easy, you know. And it was like they didn't get it. You know, it was like nobody got it until FedEx and Kinko's bought all the guys that were like me, you know, and there weren't very many. Right. And then people started taking advantage, you know, like over a year. It took years to develop a real appreciation for that digital printing on that level. And I think sometimes, you know, in Cardano, people don't understand the time it's going to take for business people to understand what's possible. Right. Just to really snap to what's being offered. And I don't think that a lot of the people that are in Cardano right now, they're not great communicators, right? You know, it's one of those things, right? You have to learn how to communicate it.
Right.
Hey, you were early, right? This was something where you were early.
Yeah, yeah. I was literally, you know, at that time when I got my machine, it was at the end of '95, and there were only 2 companies that were making those things, and I could, you know, I could do crazy stuff, right? Because of the way I had a Ricoh, the other one was Canon. And Ricoh's tech for that copier was different. And theirs, you know, the Canons work just like old mimeograph printers, right? The paper would get pulled in and then get wrapped around a drum. With the Ricoh, what I had, it just came in flat, and it stayed flat. And then the drum came down to it. And so that allowed me to put different kinds of finishes, you know, like really glossy and thick, or I could do it, you know, differently, and then I would get different results with the image based on the paper, because I could do really heavy cardstock, and I could make something look old-fashioned just by tweaking it a little bit in Photoshop, you know. And it was cool as shit. I love doing it. But
so you were ahead of your time. You had a product that was valuable, that eventually did get market share, but early on you know, people didn't yet see the value of it. And it's great. That's a great tie-in. It's a great spot for us to move forward and start looking at what the right and wrong questions are. So we'll start with the wrong questions. You know, I love, why does wrong feel so right? You know, so, but the wrong questions are things that are driven by ego. Hey, you know, I'm starting up a business. Okay. Right. Well, so I'm already front loading you with, this is important to me. This is something that I'm doing. Right. So I'm front loading my question with, hey, pay attention to what I'm doing right now. and then you're actually now setting up your customer or whoever you're speaking to, your potential customer, to like, oh man, I don't want to hurt this guy's feelings. You know, you're already setting that up. It's right out of the gun. Unless, I mean, some people will, but for the most part, most people just don't want to have that happen. When you're seeking a positive affirmation, when you're asking a question in the way that you're trying to get a positive answer. Hey, wouldn't it be great if you had this? Sure, it'd be great. Right? Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah. There's no commitment there. Right? There's no, by the way, we're terrible at future forecasting as a species. It's not any one or another of us, it's all of us. We all think more highly of what we would spend money on and what we would do to experience and what we would implement in our lives than what we actually do. So when you go seeking positive affirmation, you're setting yourself up to get that, you know, oh, I'm going to go buy this expensive device because there's going to be so many people that are going to love it, just like this person would love it. And that brings up future condition. We think ahead, but we think ahead positively every time. And we often believe that we're going to get on that treadmill every day. And we, you know, in our own personal lives. Yeah, I might buy something and then not use it. Right. How many times does that happen? How many books are on your bookshelf you haven't read? Especially the, you know, self-improvement or home improvement or whatever books, you know, how many of those? I got a bunch of them. Side note, I do read a lot of them, but I don't get to all of them. And the last one of the wrong questions is the easy answers. It's they think, you know, yeah, what you've got sounds pretty good. I've got this other thing that I'm using and it's not really great. You know, I'm having problems with it. It really kind of, so they're complaining, but are they complaining about something that, you know, that you really can do for them? Is it something that's legit, or is it something that they think's wrong, but they're maybe over exaggerating how much pain it is because it's not actually enough pain for them to move out of what it is that they have into something else? What about you guys? You guys, any examples of some wrong questions you might have asked when you're trying to get some customer feedback?
You know, less is more too.
Yeah.
Too many questions sometimes.
Yep.
You know what? One of the things I did in the '80s was I sold cars, and so like that was an amazing experience just to get trained by hard ass car dealers, right? Because they're ruthless, right? I grew up in. My dad was always in retail, and he was in retail because he loved people and he really wanted to help people, you know. And this general manager at this Toyota dealer in Dallas, he was like, his first words out of his mouth was, get out a piece of paper and a pencil, write down everything I say. And he's chain smoking in a little small Holiday Inn conference room, right? Walking up and down. He's like, looked like a Marine. And he's
Sounds
like
like a Marine.
customer. Right. Well, the customer is the most important person in our business. Write this down. Right? You know, like everybody's like writing it down because he's barking orders at us. He says, the customer will lie, cheat, and steal to fuck you in the ass. And we're not going to let him. You know, and boom. That's it. Like, this is how you sell cars.
We're not going to let him.
Right.
And that is it. And I tell you, here we go. That was just the perfect note, because here we go. I'm gonna pull onto the next slide. Why customers lie. It's like, do you want to hurt my feelings? No, they don't. They want to lie to you. They want to get theirs. They either want to do something to make you stop, or to get what it is that they want at the least amount of headache for them possible. That's it. They, like you're saying, Steve, with your dad wanted to help people, right? That's that kind of, I hate to say naive, but you know, that idea of, you know, that like, yeah, you just want to do what's right and help. And like, I get the feeling for sure, but yeah, if you do sales enough, if you do marketing enough, you find out real fast that that doesn't survive the, I think anybody in businesses can understand that's just not what the customer is there for. They're there for themselves. So when you're asking your customers questions, you got to ask them questions that get at them and themselves, because otherwise they will just lie to you.
So true. So true. The bias, it's like the behavior of some people. Some people are non-confrontational. So therefore they're going to tend to people please and answer accordingly, of course, right? So it's going to be the same answer all the time. And so it's like learning how to extract what you need from the audience for sure.
Yeah, and that's it. So this is it. If they're that kind of person, if they're the non-confrontational person, they're either just going to try to make you feel good. Oh, that's such a great idea. That's really awesome. Yeah, you should definitely do that. I think that's great. Or they're just trying to get out of the conversation entirely.
Right.
So they might just be, hey, I'm like I'm not into talking to people, so I don't really want to talk to you anymore. So they're going to give you whatever it is to end that conversation as fast as possible. And the people that will engage with you, they're either doing it for themselves to make themselves feel more comfortable. Maybe they think they know something about what it is that you're doing, and they want to share what it is that they know, or they want to complain. And a lot of times those complaints are just to complain, right? But sometimes there's real information in there, and it's figuring out how to ask the right questions to avoid these kind of scenarios that shut down your conversation or send you down the wrong direction toward the right direction.
Right.
So
one more comment on that though too is there's in a selling environment, particularly power selling environment, one lie that I'll run into a lot is that who I'm dealing with is the decision maker.
Oh yeah.
And they won't implicitly state that, but they will, you see what I'm saying? They will explicitly present the scenario that's the case, and you can waste a hell of a lot of time wasting with I don't know what the professional term. So it's like almost a blocker, but in that case, you can more than often circumvent just by scheduling a different meeting with a different person. So if you recognize that,
good one. Yeah, Steve, you can go ahead. We don't really have to raise our hands here, so just contribute whenever we're in between.
Something that I've noticed over the last 20 years or so, in large part just due to just basic research and really smart people writing books about research and disseminating this information, is there is a growing understanding of these dynamics. And for me, these are 20th century dynamics, what you're talking about, that customers lie and all of these things, because what's being taught now to a lot of people, and I've experienced it at a really high level with professional musicians in terms of like how to be a good musician, how to be a good band member. And I experienced it again in crypto. Like if you're just willing to be open and honest, right? And you're really just being sincere, that comes across, right? That's communicatable. And what I've noticed, because like these musicians, right? They would really talk about, and what was amazing about this, I spent about 3 years learning from these musicians, and they would bring in really great musicians, and then they would bring in really great musicians in front of these students who were assholes, right? And they didn't have to do anything with the asshole musicians. The asshole musicians revealed themselves by the way they played, by over soloing or however they spoke, and then the asshole musicians would go away and they would say, do you understand why this guy doesn't have a regular gig? Right? I mean, he's a great guitar player, but you can kind of see why really high profile musicians don't want him in their band.
Absolutely.
Right? And they really demonstrate that. And I've seen that in the Cardano community, right? I don't have to spend more than 15 or 20 minutes with somebody, who's new to Cardano and has got an idea before I know, like, A, he's either a scammer or, he's a VC and he's really just trying to cash it as quick as he can. right? He's not really into decentralization. He's not really into collaboration. He's really into just maintaining ownership, and he's trying to suck you into doing work for free.
Right.
You know, like these people are really obvious once you understand the cues. And I think this is why I appreciate what you do, Lloyd, with these breakout rooms, because it really kind of helps people learn how to see that, you know, with the people that they will run into in the Cardano community.
Thanks, Steve, because that's absolutely our idea. We're hoping that the more that the community sees these kinds of videos, the better off they'll all be, the better equipped they'll be to, you know, to make better business decisions, because we're only going to be a stronger community the more of these good, strong businesses we build here. So, and I think that's one of the most important things about being a crypto in general. You actually have to build a business. It's not just, you know, the product is what it is. You have to have the business expertise behind it in order to make the product successful, because otherwise somebody else that knows the business is going to come along and do that. So on to the questions themselves. Let's look at what does build a good question for feedback. And this is where, Doug, I'm gonna want your help as much as possible, right? But I have these 4 things that I think are just critical to crafting these questions, and you kind of have to see if the questions you're asking solve at least one of these, if not 2 or 3 of these points that I've got up here on the board. So like things like focusing on what they're doing now. What are they actually using? If they've got a problem and you hear that problem, what are they using for that problem now? It's got to be something. It might be, I hired an intern that sits at a desk and moves this cart to this other location. Okay, that, you know, they may have picked a way of doing something to solve that problem. The next one is asking open-ended questions. Why is that? How is that? When did that happen? Let them speak. And this is my favorite anecdote on this one. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you speak. I love that one. It's so easy. It's so relatable. I'm sure we've all heard that one, but that one is the best one. Just make sure you ask those open-ended questions, and then don't look for the next opportunity to speak. Listen, take notes, find out what they're saying, guide them when you need to, but try to be listening to what they're actually saying. The next one is talking about past experiences. The people are focused on the future easily. And again, we've already talked about how being focused on the future is not good for the information you need. You actually need to talk about what caused them problems in the past. What are things that have stuck with them that are painful? Because those are the points where you can find things that need solutions. And then lastly, find out if it's actually a capital P problem. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier as well, where people will often complain about things, but they just like to complain about them. It's not something that actually needs fixing. So those are my 4. I'm sure we can play with it a little. Like, Doug, we can talk maybe a little bit about some of the questions that we used, like for DripDropz when we were doing the Main Street suite, how we came to kind of some of those decisions, and, you know, what some of those questions were that we went with, and how they kind of fit into this area.
Sure. Yeah, totally. And I love these. I love these 4 points. If you look at all 4 of these points, and you know, turn these into some quadrant, the intersecting point of all of them is that they help you discover what the trigger is, because you need to understand the trigger, and there are different ways to extract the trigger so you can understand people's problems. So yeah, some people, you know, and we spend a lot of time. I love that, because this is for Main Street, the questionnaire. It's going to be an ongoing thing. We want to learn, and there's going to be new products, and also with crypto, people's behavior, their relationship with it, it's rapidly changing, as we see. So it's ongoing, and that was a big thing, to go back and make sure we got those questions right. And of course, there's always, and I think the context matters, right? Like, so if you're looking at, let's say, open-ended questions versus, like, you know, do you want to give canned responses, give them the option to have canned answers, or open-ended? We ultimately determined that I think it was nice to have a nice mixture of both. It's going to provide us a lot of insight. Because really, you got to look at it. If you're looking at what your goal is, what is your goal? In this case, it's high level enough. We want to understand people's relationship with crypto, their experience with it, before, and then slowly lead them down the funnel to understand, okay, if they have used it or if they currently use it, you know, then what are their experiences with it? So it's like peeling back like the layers of the onion, you know, before you throw somebody straight
Right
off the
on.
cliff into the pool. You
Now,
know?
That's a great point. Go ahead, Kyle.
Now, Doug, is that more beneficial to extract the proper information from the individual, or is that more beneficial to process the information? So what I'm thinking is, with the rise of all this AI technology, can we maybe backpedal some of that process into that in a clever way?
100%. I'm with you on the process. I'm with you on the process, because everyone is so focused on the end result, and it's like, well, it's always the question: how do you get from A to B? You know. So
it's
definitely
the process to extract the
process.
information. Because if you throw something at somebody, they just may. It's like almost like a hypnotist, right? You got to do it right to get where you want to go. Otherwise, you're just going to get kind of a mess. And while you may be able to extract and congregate mass data, the quality of it may not be as consistent if you did the same with the process too. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
You know.
Right. So letting them self-identify on some demographics, right? Like we were doing with, have you used crypto before? Yes or no. It's a yes or no question. It's a pretty easy one, right? Have you bought an item with crypto, you know, or do you just save it? You know, there are dualities that we can split people amongst, right? And that was part of our decision tree, was exactly that. Either dualities or sometimes even a group of 3 to 4 possible options that, you know, would move people in one direction or the other. The other one was business owner, right? Are you a business owner or not? Because we had a particular question where we needed to know if they would be, how many of the users would use a whole chunk of our app, right? We had a chunk of our app that's dedicated to business users, another chunk that's dedicated to just end users. And so we had to figure out how much is our split. And we were actually, I was pleased to see, it looked like we were, you know, somewhere around 25-30% ish were business owners, and the rest were not. So we actually had a pretty, it helped us like have a little bit better understanding from the survey that we were hitting a good mix for our audience, because we were pretty on point. Like, yeah, that's about what it should be based on demographics of the area that we were testing. So it was a sanity check for us.
Exactly. And we see it every day. You see it in video games. I mean, these are timeless things. The choose your own adventure, storybooks and stuff like that. You don't often get the end. You may get a glimpse of the end, but you got to get through the beginning of the story. So, you know, I like the gamification of things as well. Walking them down the path anyways, you know what I mean?
For sure.
It's the same way, you know, I'm kind of going back to a point you were mentioning, Lloyd, about the listening. You know, what was the analogy or something?
It's you got two ears and one mouth.
The idiom, two ears and one mouth. Yeah. Honestly, I feel like, so what, this is my second year or so in the space. And I still feel like I've been pretty quiet, but I feel like it's necessary because I feel like I honestly feel like to speak any sooner about things without gathering as much, you know, understanding baseline as I have, you know, I end up there with my foot in my mouth. You know what I mean? So it's like it just makes sense. It just makes sense.
Yeah, we can find out if there's room for 2 feet in one mouth, right?
Right, for sure. For sure.
So it's an interesting challenge. You know, this is a fun part for me. And this is something I've done well and I've done poorly over the years. So it feels good to talk about this topic. You know, I've been the guy where I'm like, yeah, so I'm doing this. Would you like to see this? You know, and wouldn't this be great? And I've done all those questions and reacted and acted on all of those questions in the past. And sometimes it fell flat. So it's cool to chat about these things and kind of bring them back up and help others kind of hopefully find the right path with a little less friction.
100%.
How about you, Kyle? You got any of those stories where you just asked the wrong question and got and went the wrong direction, or do you have an example of maybe a good question that hits for you?
You know, it really depends. It depends. You know, I approach every situation different. I I don't like to waste a lot of time on small talk questions and things like that. You know, you know, I sold technically, in the technical realm, you really, it's a different sell than like a car salesman, or
Sure.
you know, kind of like maybe a regional territorial kind of job where, you know, relationships can matter a whole lot more. You know, you don't have to justify your decision down to, like, you know, using math and stuff like that, numbers,
Right
you know,
on.
that, right. So it's a different type of sell. As far as questions, yeah, everything's different. I don't have anything off the top of my head. I like to, what I do like to do is, at the end of every meeting, I like to ask, did you accomplish all of your objectives today? And it's a great question, because it gets everybody thinking. It makes me think if I accomplished everything I want to accomplish, and it makes them sit back and think. And once it makes them verbalize a yes. And that's what you want to start, you know, you want to get them verbalizing a yes. So
Absolutely.
really great question that I like to ask at the end of every meeting.
Yep. I do enjoy that one. I've heard you ask that question many times, and it's always like, yep, because it's an important, especially when it's a new conversation, it's a new sales process, you know, making sure that that person has what they need, and they, you know, they've accomplished what they were there for. That, you know, it's
I learned
important.
that question. Yeah, I learned that question from the CEO of a company that was making SSDs before SSDs were called SSDs.
Nice.
So yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah. Super experts in flash tech. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a cool point of the idea of getting the feedback and making sure that the feedback that you're getting is useful, is walking the customer through telling you what it is that they need. And that's a great way, when you're literally asking them, you're just like, full stop. Hey, did you get, it's everything that you needed asked? It's there. And that, but it's a good inflection point also to kind of move on to a slightly different topic. It's under the same purvey, though. Today I wanted to bring this topic up because I've seen it. This is something I've actually seen in the Cardano community. It can happen in any kind of business, and it can. This is interesting because it's also kind of coming from the other perspective, the customer perspective, right? As individuals, we don't necessarily want to hurt anybody's feelings. We don't want to give somebody feedback that, hey, maybe this isn't the right place or the right time or the right whatever, but that leads to a degree of toxic positivity. And ultimately that's harmful feedback, right? This is the kind of thing that if you keep hearing you're doing a great job, but you never hear, hey, if you improve this, you will be better. Or if you maybe look at this, I could put this into my project, or I could find a partnership where we could work together. If you don't give the feedback as the end user that, you know, things could be better by meeting this need of mine, then you're actually damping down the whole ecosystem, especially as small as we are, right? Now, and it is socially driven. I had made that note here too. It's really hard when everybody around you is going, rah, rah, rah. Yeah, this is great. Keep it up. Yeah, that if everybody's doing that, it's really hard to be the outlier and say, hey, guy, this could be a problem. You might have an issue with this. There might be a legal or a technical hurdle over here, right? Those are kinds of things. And then ultimately, as I said here, it leads to the misallocation of funding and resources, because people jump on projects because they heard hype and they heard cheers and they heard everything else without ever actually looking at any of the fundamentals. So I'm not getting into naming names today, so I want us to avoid that in the process, but just in general, I hope we could talk about this for a few minutes today, because this is something that, how do we combat this? How do we remain positive with the individuals that we're speaking to without giving them feedback that tells them keep doing exactly what you're doing without changing anything, when they really do need to focus on making some changes, making some improvements in there?
How would we So how would we do that? Like in our, like in an environment where, okay, let's just say like our work environment, or like if it was
Yeah.
an issue where somebody was acting, how would we approach it then in a not untoxic way? You see what I'm saying? Like, like how would we do it then? And maybe we can start to draw a line of where, like what an appropriate procedure or path would be.
Right.
Like,
And
I guess
I
what's
know
an example? I mean, I don't, maybe a work environments. I mean, I guess this is a work environment, right?
it is. Catalyst Town Hall is a work environment, and if somebody comes up and lays out their stuff that, needs that they felt was important and good, how do you give them feedback if there was issues, like problems with their presentation, problems with the data that they collected, problems with the solution that that maybe need to be modified. I mean, we had, like I said, we've had some examples of that over the last, just this year in town hall and in after town halls where it wasn't well received when people tried to give feedback. So there's even that kind of pushback. So how do we find ways to do it? And we've had issues. I don't think we've had issues with toxic positivity and DripDropz, but we've had issues where things needed to be addressed, where people needed feedback that was hard feedback to give, right?
Yeah.
And the way I know so far, the way we've approached it, we've talked, we've gotten a small group together, not necessarily the whole team, but a small group together, members of the board or members of one particular team or another, and sat down and chewed on the problem and tried to find a reasonable approach, good feedback, actionable feedback to give. And then I know you've had to do a lot of this, Kyle. You've been the one that's
Even the message is delivered by a friend. That's what happens.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think what happened. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, that's how we've handled it up to this point. And that's why, like, it's cool. We kind of have felt through a method and we've kind of figured a method out. But that's why this was a topic I really, I see it happen. I see it happen in town hall. I see it happen in Twitter spaces. I see it happen all the time where it's just like, oh, that was so great. And it ends there. And I'm like, but wait a minute. Like, this is clearly missing this. There's clearly problems there. It's not FUD, right? It's not that kind of thing. It's, hey, you could be better. But how do I deliver that without being the bad guy, right?
But, I think it's a problem in Catalyst, and the way Catalyst is run. And I wouldn't call it toxic. I would call it misguided positivity. I mean, there have been people that come in and they game it, right? In different ways. And I feel like this doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't surprise anybody. It certainly shouldn't surprise IOG. But, like, if we don't talk about it when we've been gamed and like on a input outputs part, bring the community in. Hey, this has been happening. Mm-hmm. This is how we dealt with it. What's the feedback from the community? But instead, they don't talk about it.
Right.
You know what? That's human, I think. I don't think that's restricted to Catalyst, because like we did talk about it. We talked a hell of a lot about it. Just, I guess the community that's involved maybe doesn't talk as loud about it, because I can draw the same parallel with bad ISPOs and stake pools and things like that. Those communities didn't really talk a whole lot about it, and I understand why. I think there may be a human thing there that it possibly, definitely a bias, right? Like all humans have this propensity to justify our actions, right? At least we've got to live with ourselves, so I don't think it's isolated to Catalyst. I think it's more of a human problem.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about, this is the space we work in. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, you give people sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, man.
It's really hard because these situations I'm referring to had to do with specific individuals over the last year or so. That's why, you know, I don't want to call them out and talk about them. You know, I really just point to the
Exactly. And that's the
dynamic.
hope here. Like, because I want this conversation to continue. I'm trying to start this conversation within the Catalyst community without calling out any individuals.
Right.
I'd rather set up a feedback loop where when an individual needs that feedback, that we have like a safe and approachable way to give that to them.
How do we do that in a decentralized environment though? Because you have to be, it's
That's
a very sensitive, every situation you have to approach it uniquely almost, right?
Yeah.
You have to have that discussion. You have to have a consensus of something's not right. And then
exactly.
how do we even achieve that type of consensus in a way where, you know, because if you're achieving the consensus in a decentralized environment, every party is going to see you achieving the consensus, and then all
That's
hell's going to
right.
break. So like, how do you,
Right.
so this
So,
is
yeah.
interesting.
It's interesting. It's a tough problem. It's an extant problem. We have it. Right. I think I'm not sure if anybody in the room disagrees. I'm welcome to hear any disagreement on that. But it's an extant problem. It is an extant problem within Catalyst. And like Kyle was mentioning, within the ISPO community, like it definitely exists. It's out there. How do we approach it? And I'm just hoping to continue this conversation. I don't think we're going to solve it today. I don't think it ends today. I think I'm just trying to drive it forward and looking for talking points that we can have in the future to discuss this again.
Context is key. The way in which people receive criticism or give it, you know what I mean? But one thing I've realized, and it's the thing that I do love about the space, which is different than any other industry that I've been part of or seen, you know, at least worked in, which is, you know, people get to hold out the public court here. And I think if you always keep that in mind, then you look at the words that come out of your mouth, whether the criticism given or receiving, you know, the North Star, the root of it should come from the place that it's the responsibility to uplift the whole ecosystem. And I think that removes a lot of things, because people are afraid to talk. Like, they want to just be supportive, they want to bullshit just as much as they want to you know what I mean? Not or go the other way or attack or tear down. And
Right.
And I think like one thing you know, again, it's not something, I don't know how to solve this, and you know, as you're saying, it's an ongoing thing. But I do love that it's one thing that I've seen in the community is that people hold that public court. And I've loved what I've seen, where people who maybe had it out with each other, they still break bread with each other. You know what I mean? And when all the dust settles, there's still handshaking going on from people who, because I guess, as I say, the real recognize real. So it's like the people who are in sincerity, as we're saying, you know, that's going to shine through. I don't know if there is a tactic otherwise. You know what I mean? I think if you want to go play a bureaucratical or political game, there's places to do that, and they do exist within the ecosystem. But I think when the discussions are held publicly, you know, you don't really have to strategize against it so much. I don't know. That's my thoughts on it, but I don't know. It's an ongoing matter. But I've been happy to see that.
I appreciate
I'm
it.
so glad you said that about the context, right? You know, because I can totally depersonalize this from something that happened this morning. You know, like we do a live coding session at Gimbal Labs, you know, where we're looking at coding in Plutus. And we were focusing on some of the tools that are available on Mesh, you know, from Modify Labs this morning. And there's a new guy. He's just been here for like 2 or 3 weeks, and he doesn't have a lot of developer experience, but he's diving in, and he's a pretty sharp guy. But you know, so like we're looking at one of these smart contract tools, you know, that Mesh has built, and he's like, you know, I've been there, and I just wish there was like a help button to tell me what this is good for. And I was like, yeah, see, that's a problem, right? That's a problem, because it depends the context, you know, that somebody's looking at it. And if you went ahead and supplied an answer that satisfied you, that kind of limits how you're going to look at this from now on, and may make it less accessible to somebody who's looking at it from a different context. And you know, and I think that's so true about everything, you know, like with some of the people problems that we've had in Catalyst, you know, like There's one guy I've always felt bad for, because I thought about the context from where this guy came from, right? I mean, he came from basically a failed state, and everybody wanted to treat him like he was from Philadelphia.
Yeah, right.
You know, and
Right.
that's not the situation this man was living in.
Right.
And it seemed to matter to anybody about that. And, you know, to me, that's like, that was a collective failure, and for me, in my view.
Right. It's hard to check our own biases
Totally.
at the door, right? And that's
Yeah.
that, you know, that's why I like a lot of when we give feedback, we do gather 2 or 3 of us together before we give the feedback to check against one another to make sure that you know, that there aren't biases, that it's not going to be harmful feedback, you know, that it's going to be valid. So, you know, so yeah, and maybe that is part of the process. Is it that over time we, rather than just accepting that things are what they are and like, yay, that was great, and then we move on, you know, that we start building a culture of hey, let's have a feedback session. You know, you gave that presentation, be available for a feedback session, and be willing to listen. Just, you know, call it a listening session, like, especially if it's a bigger thing, a more, you know, a more, and that's going to be hard for people coming into the space that aren't accustomed to that. But that's where I think
Right.
it's a cultural challenge for us, that if we do build that, that's what's good in the culture, that's a part of the process, then people maybe can see it happening before it happens to them. I mean, there's always going to be the person that comes in and drops everything on our doorstep and says, here's my beautiful idea. That's going to happen, right? And that's okay. And that person may feel like they got their dog kicked and walk away when the community doesn't react the way they expect them to. But hopefully they'll learn lessons from that and come back for more later after they've experienced that. But, you know, that's my feeling on this, is that this is a cultural thing, that we're going to have to try to build in feedback cycles for the community that are acceptable, that aren't fighting each other on Twitter or, you know, or blasting somebody in town hall or whatever.
Should be a little bit encouraging to see.
So like,
You know,
doesn't that
it's-
mean we need like a grievance process or something? Like, I mean, because there's,
Yeah.
I mean, we've got different types of things happening, right? Like, I mean, like, okay, so like one thing would be like, you know, I guess maybe degrees of like, you know, like, okay, let's say I did a presentation and I got my data set wrong. That's one thing. Like, how would you address that? Okay, that's, you know, I mean, normally we do just fine with that. Hey, man, no, it's actually this. Like, you know, you gotta have a little thick skin. Oh, my bad. I think we get through that one. Okay, so all right, maybe we don't worry about that model. So, I guess if it is something, so I guess maybe then it is something where it's like, okay, you really have to correct somebody in a way that will cause friction. Maybe that's something. But whether the reasons why you would want to do that, right? Like maybe something was said incorrectly about, you know, some of your own work, right? That could be it. Or or just, you know, something that needs to be said, or as a community member, you believe it's an incorrect direction for the community. Perhaps, let's say someone's giving a presentation and it's like, hey guys, here's what we're going to do with Catalyst, and everyone's like, yeah, it's awesome. You're like, no, you're crazy, we're driving off a cliff.
Right.
How do we address that? Like, maybe that's an issue. We start there, and we backpedal that into like a grievance process. Like,
It's interesting, right? So this is exactly what I was hoping for today. I was just hoping we take this back. If any of you other guys have something you'd like to add, I'd love to hear it. We are running up. We're running right up on the hour, but I've got about 3 to 5 minutes left for final thoughts. So if any of you other guys that haven't participated today, if you have a thought on any of the stuff we've talked about today, we'd love to hear it now.
I actually wanted to take it back to when you're saying you come together, discuss the feedback, and then give it.
Mm-hmm.
So just from my experience, that also creates a bias because it creates conformity bias, right? So how do you go about, like, because both of these are like have its own problems. So how do you go about that?
Yeah. And you're right. You're absolutely right, Harsha. It can cause its own form of bias. If you've got 3 or 4 people that have the same opinion about something and they come together, now they've got a stronger same opinion, right?
Right. But in our case, when we've done it, we've come together and we've left with new opinions because we don't do it in a bias. It's not like a lynch mob coming together. It's like, okay, we've got to solve a problem. Let's try and get a 360 degree of what we're actually dealing with. And that's when you come, that's the hardest part. What are we actually dealing with? Because assumptions are one thing, but reality is another, and they're very rarely the same. And so,
yeah, I agree. I think, and I know Kyle pretty good. I'm getting to know Lloyd, and I think everybody here, and I know Harsha from a lot of meetings too, and Newman, like there are some echo chambers in the community, but like with you guys, what I know is you're going to try, as much as your imagination allows, to say, well, maybe they're looking at it like this, or they could be looking at it like this, and maybe I'm looking at it like this. Maybe I should look at it more like that. And like when a group comes together to think about the different perspectives, I think you avoid that echo chamber aspect to it.
I like that.
And we just kind of have to be good people on that level.
Yeah. How about Newman? You're trying to do some facilitation stuff, right? How maybe is this something that facilitation could help with?
I think it's all about facilitation. I think it's being able to recognize those environments, or when it's happening, or when the vibe of something goes on, and then being able to give and receive feedback. I think it's a culture, and I think facilitation adds to that culture. And just highlighting it, just this breakout room, just getting a container around it, saying, okay, this is a thing, and then this recording. I'd love to get this recording and go back over it. Like all of your meetings, you're fantastic. That's not overly positive. It's just good feedback.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate you very much.
So, so if on that note, if there's no other feedback, we're right at the hour. So I wanted to see if there's anything else from in the room. All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much for attending today. I really appreciate it. This has been a fantastic session as always. This recording will be up on YouTube later today or tomorrow at the latest. And after that, you guys are welcome to take a look, take it apart, and do whatever we can. Good luck to all of y'all and the rest of your endeavors today, and we'll see you next week.